それでは定刻となりましたので、国際 LC セミナーの93回目を、開始させていただきたいと思います。I'm Keiko Suzuki, Deputy Director of the Art Research Center. This seminar is truly special as we can welcome not only Dr. Tinios, but also the faculty and the graduate students of the University of East Anglia. As for Dr. Tinios, it's our great pleasure and honor to welcome him back as a guest speaker. Dr. Tinios studied in the USA and the UK and Taiwan and Japan. He taught at the University of Leeds in the UK for a long time. And before COVID, he was a regular visitor to the center and an avid supporter and a good friend of the center. He began his academic career as a historian of ancient China. Gradually, his interests shifted to Japan and more specifically to print culture in early modern Japan. He is particularly interested in the illustrated book in Japan. His publications, that's very extensive, but include Japanese prints, ukiyo-e in Edo, 1700 to 1900 by British Museum Press, and he co-authored Understanding Japanese Illustrated Books, a short introduction with Suzuki Jun, published from Brill. In addition, he has written articles on Kawamura Bunpo, on Hokusai's books, on Shunpon, and on Nishiki-e. As for the faculty and graduate students of the UEA and Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures, we have been working together for a long time, but this seminar marks new development. Thank you for joining us. So without further ado, please start, Dr. Tinios.
Thank you very much for your introduction, and I am very pleased to be able to talk to you today about an album of preparatory drawings by Katsushika Isai. Now, sorry, I must get this moving. Yes, that is intended to be a blank screen for the moment. In 2020, the British Museum acquired 103 previously unknown hanshitae, block-ready drawings, by Hokusai. These drawings had been in the collection of the famous French jeweler Henri Vevey. Immediately upon acquiring them, the British Museum made all of the drawings available through its website. The photography of the drawings was done by Dr. Matsuba Ryoko. This autumn, 103 of the drawings were published in their actual size with commentaries by Tim Clark in the book you see here. And currently, all 103 drawings are on display in the Prints and Drawings Gallery at the British Museum in an exhibition that was sensitively curated by Dr. Alfred Haft. The speed with which the British Museum made these drawings available to the public and to scholars is exemplary. Last summer, 2 years after the Hokusai drawings had been offered for sale at an auction in Paris, pardon me, an album of 38 preparatory drawings by Katsushika Isai was sold at an auction house in Geneva, in Switzerland. The title slip on the album reads, Isai Gashiki Shitazu. The drawings in the album relate to Isai Gashiki. This album of Isai drawings had also belonged to Henri Vevey. It too was previously unknown. It is now also in the British Museum. And I'm happy to report that Dr. Matsuba has already photographed it, and the preparatory drawings will soon also be available for study through the British Museum's website. So today I will introduce Isai Gashiki Shitazu to you. And here is an outline of my lecture. I will begin with Isai's output as an artist, his paintings, color woodblock prints, and illustrated books. I'll then tell you a little bit about Isai Gashiki. Then I will introduce Isai Gashiki Shitazu. Then I'll look at the materiality of Isai Gashiki Shitazu. And then I will try to answer the question, who prepared block-ready drawings, or hanshitae? But before I proceed, I would like to dedicate this lecture to the memory of a dear friend and colleague, Muto Junko. Now, very little is known about the life of Katsushika Isai beyond his life dates and his family name, Kiyomizu Soji. Isai associated with Hokusai in the 1840s, when Hokusai was in his 80s, and Isai himself was in his 20s. The artist Katsushika Isai did not create a large body of artworks. His paintings are rare. We're told that from the 1860s, he lived in Yokohama, and he created paintings for sale for foreigners, to foreigners. And I found a number of his paintings in foreign museums, particularly in the United States. He appears to have designed here's a closer view of one of his paintings. He appears to have designed very few nishikie. So far, I've just found one print that is entirely his own work, an Oban warrior print dated about 1848, which is in the Art Research Center's collection. The other Isai prints that I have found are collaborative works. For example, he contributed small, insignificant landscape scenes to the series Ero no Hana. And finally, Isai fully illustrated 15 books when he was between the age of 28 and 46. And today he is best known for one of those books, Isai Gashiki of 1864. And here I give you a table of his book production. It was only after, we're going to come back to these titles in a moment, it was only after Hokusai's death in 1849 that Isai began to illustrate books. In the year Hokusai died, Isai published his first design book, his first edehon, which is Kachosansui Zushiki Shohen. And here's a selection of pages from that book. And you can see in it his depth the depth of his debt to Hokusai. Sorry. Now, after the publication of this first volume of his edehon, he did not return to the genre until the 1860s. It's a very interesting gap in his production of this kind of book. But in the meantime, he was doing other things, as we see back in the table. First of all, he produced a cluster of illustrated poetry anthologies, which you see here. And also he was illustrating yomihon. He published 5 yomihon between 1848 and 1858. In some cases, he illustrated the entire yomihon. In others, he contributed a hen or 2 hen to works that had been also illustrated that were being illustrated by other artists. And then there are other stray books that he illustrated a Buddhist sutra with commentary and others, as we'll see. But I just want to show you the range of his poetry anthologies. This one from 1850, so shortly after Hokusai's death, is a substantial volume. And for me, it's very interesting that Egawa Sentaro was the block cutter. Now, Egawa Sentaro had been a pupil of Egawa Tomekichi, who was Hokusai's block cutter of choice. And it was Sentaro who had actually cut all the blocks for the 3rd volume of Fugaku Hyake, and also for some other Hokusai books that finally were published around 1850, although Hokusai had prepared the block-ready drawings for them 15 years earlier. So here are samples of Hokusai's illustrations for this poetry anthology. The color, of course, has been added by hand, as you see here. This was a refined product. It was an expensive book. It was hanshibon size and quite thick. But he also contributed to a Chuhon Hyakunin issue series. Now, this series is very interesting. Hokusai provided kuchie in the first 20 portraits for the first 3 titles, which I have listed here for you. And then Isai followed that with kuchie only for the 4th volume in this series. So this is Hokusai's contribution. And you can see that he was providing kuchie and 20 portraits. And then the next 4 artists, Kuniyoshi, Shigenobu, Eisen, and Toyokuni, which is Kunisada, each contributed further 20 to give us 100 poets. And here is Hokusai's kuchie with a signature telling us that he's 88 years old. And then these are further kuchie that he produced. And at the bottom left, we see the first of his portraits of the 100 poets. Now, it's very interesting here that these may well be the designs that are mentioned in a letter of the mid-1830s, in which Hokusai says, I know that my daughter was going to do 100 poets for you, but I want to take over the job now. So these may well be the date from the 1830s, but were not published until the late 1840s. And again, I would stress this was not uncommon in the history of Hokusai's books. So this is Isai's contribution now, where he only produced the kuchie, and the artists who provided the portraits of the poets are, as you see, Kuniyoshi Sarahide, Kuniteru, Yoshitora, and Toyokuni III again. And it's a very fine kuchie that he produced. And it's followed by smaller scenes again, but that's the extent of his contribution here. Now, following on Hokusai's interest in technical matters, and we find many technical things illustrated in his manga, for example, and in his book on architecture, Hokusai, Isai illustrated a book on surveying the land. And he produced this sort of drawing. There are quite a few drawings in this book, where we get these Hokusai-esque landscapes, and then also a careful rendering of the equipment that's being used to survey. Now, Hokusai, possibly with the collaboration of his daughter Oi, illustrated Sakago Ichidai Kizue, a book on the Buddha. Very dramatic, very powerful illustrations in this book. And this is another line that Isai himself followed in the 1850s and 60s. The first, the Nichiren Shonin Ichidai Zue of 1858, is actually a Yomihon life of Nichiren. And the second, Kanongyo Ryaku Zukai, is a sutra with commentaries. This is the Nichiren Yomihon, and we can see a debt to Hokusai. But if we look at this image, those clouds, those waves, I mean, are Hokusai-esque, but they become a decorative pattern. They don't have a real meaning, a real sense of force in them. And this figure does not seem to be concerned by the dreadful circumstances they find themselves in. And the sail seems a bit weak for the tempest that they find themselves in. And then, but what we find is that these images were enough like Hokusai for publishers in the Meiji period to reassign the books to Hokusai. And this was very easily done. All they did here was cut out the kanji I and put Hoku in there. So we have the artist as Katsushika Hokusai. The second book, the Kanongyo, it has extremely elaborate images in it, as you can see. And this book was also reassigned to Hokusai in the Meiji period. Again, it was so simple, but for some reason, they also changed the title of the book in the Meiji reprint. And of course, it changed the publishers here. But if we look at the colophon, again, it's that one critical character that they changed. Now here, where they say that in Meiji 24, there was supplementary cutting, all the supplementary cutting that I've been able to find in the Meiji copy is the addition of the changing of the character in the artist's name, both here on the colophon and on the inside front cover, and then the addition of this text telling us that they've amended the blocks. But this is something that happened many times, that books by people in Hokusai's orbit were reassigned to him. This was already happening in the Edo period. It's not just a Meiji phenomenon. Anyway, back to Isai. Isai only designed 3 edehon. I already mentioned Kacho Sansui Zukushi, which is what he started with in 1849. And then there was the Sansui Kacho Manga Hayabiki, which is a later work, 1867, and a final volume was added after Isai's death in 1881. Those two are Chuhon size, full of small images, not particularly distinguished. But we then have Isai Gashiki of 1864, which is probably his greatest achievement as a book illustrator. And here is a quick overview of the content of Isai Gashiki. This is an early Meiji reprint of the book when the two volumes were bound together as one. And it's the images are arranged thematically. We begin with illustrations for each of the 54 Genji chapters. We then have court scenes, a sequence of warrior images, designs for Netsuke. We'll be seeing some of these more closely. Then there were designs for Inro, for Makie on Inro. Then a couple of flower designs, landscapes. And this is important. We see these thematically like this. And we think, for example, what's missing here is anything to do with Jimbutsu. And if we look at the colophon, we'll see it states clearly that volumes 3 and 4 will soon be made available. The blocks will soon be cut, the books will be published. Now, this Isai Gashiki was a popular book. I was quite surprised to find that there is this Meiji 28, 1895, facsimile edition of the book. The blocks were recut. And the changes in the blocks are curious. As you see here, the Gashiki had in the Hashira here, Shohen, the first volume, the first part. That has been removed from here, from the Hashira of the facsimile edition. And the format of the pagination has been changed. But we have Daihi here. This is saying this is the final sheet of the book. However, the dogo of the publisher remains the same. This is very curious. I'm not sure exactly what to make about maintaining the dogo because that publisher was no longer involved in the publication. But then I found that just 4 years after the publication of the facsimile edition, the blocks were already in the hands of another publisher who was still offering it for sale. So clearly this was a book that people were interested in. It was never reassigned to Hokusai though. Now, let's look at the main topic of my talk to you today, the Isai Gashiki Shitazu. This contains 38 preparatory drawings. 23 of those drawings were designed for Isai Gashiki volumes 1 and 2. And when I show them to you, there'll be no markings, you'll just see the images. There are also 15 preparatory drawings for designs for Isai Gashiki volumes 3 and 4. Those volumes were never published. The images that were never published have a star, as you see here, up in the top right corner. So here's the opening spread. And actually, to the right, we see Isai, Katsushika Isai, Zuiga, Shohenzen. Now, this may have been the original title for Isai Gashiki, and then they decided to go with Gashiki instead of Zuiga. As you can see, even from this first opening, the drawings in this album are in various stages of preparation. Now this one, sorry, so these are both starred, these were never published. This is one of the images that was published. And here you can see how close it is to the published image. But it also shows us some interesting little refinements. As you can see in the drawing, this was the basket, but then the artist changed his mind. And in the printed version, we have the second thought here, but in mirror image. Let's go back to the drawings. I'll be talking about individual drawings in detail in a moment. But first, we'll survey the drawings in the book. You notice some of them have a good deal of underdrawing or preparatory drawing, as you can see here. Now, this is a backlit photo showing us how the horse and rider in the top left was pasted in. It had been drawn on a separate piece of paper and added to the overall composition. Some of the drawings are made up that way. Others are a single sheet of paper, as you see with this one. And we'll be talking at length about this particular drawing later. Now, something curious here. This is one of the unpublished drawings. However, the horse and rider in the top left does appear in Kachosansui Zushiki, part 3, which was published in 1864, the same year as Isai Gashiki. There's a great deal of underdrawing in this one that we can see. And here we have the same image twice, an earlier stage on the left and a later stage on the right. But we still don't have a hanshide, a block-ready drawing. Another unpublished image. This was published. And this was published. And then there are these wonderful jimbutsu scenes that never appeared in print. And here they haven't filled in the top left corner of the mihiraki, of the double page spread. And we have two versions of this, which I will discuss in detail later. And we have two versions here, left and right. The less finished on the left, the more finished on the right. And this one was fully realized in Isai Gashiki. And this was also published. And here are the 54 chapters of Genji Monogatari. Quite interestingly, we have the Genji code signs here in them in dilute ink, but these do not appear in the printed version. However, all of the little details suggested in dilute ink on some of these, as here and here, are fully realized in the printed versions of these little scenes. Like here, those branches and so on. And these are the designs for makie, for the decoration of inro. And these were brilliantly realized in the book itself. The book is a very fine bakumatsu publication. And just to show you for a moment here how this has been compiled. So you can see that the most of the inro, the designs, were drawn on separate pieces of paper and then glued onto a backing sheet. And the captions were written on the backing sheet. But in this case, we also have a whole scene that was sketched onto the backing sheet. So there you are. More inro designs, right? And then we have the concluding image in the book and what is actually half a landscape on the left. Then we have a full landscape, the other half of that landscape, and a court scene on the left, which actually appears in the book. So here is to explain what happened there. When they were pasting in the images, somebody mixed up a couple of sheets there. And then we come to these marvelous designs for netsuke, front and back, as you can see. And with this last spread of netsuke, the album ends. I would also point out, though, here at the bottom, we get 3 views of this netsuke that consists of 5 no masks grouped together. So that is Isai Gashiki Shitazu. Now, this is, again, the content of the Isai Gashiki, and I've blocked out the pages that are missing from the album of drawings. And what I found quite curious is that this is one of the Genji chapters. This is a warrior design. This is inro in rectangular frames, and these are the more complex forms. And it looks almost like somebody decided that they wanted a selection. They took out a selection from among the shitae for the book when the album was being put together. It seems to me more than a coincidence that you should just have individuals from just about each category removed from the drawings. That's just a thought, may or may not be right. But we have here a compilation that includes both published images and unpublished images. Now, In my discussion of them, I'm going to be using two words, penultimate and anti-penultimate. So I'm just giving them to you here before I go on now to a discussion of the drawings themselves. So first of all, I'd like to say that I believe after close study of these drawings that we can say that the stages of the creation of a book illustration go as follows. There is a preliminary drawing, and this is likely to be in done in diluting very lightly, and it just gives us the overall shape of the design. It's quickly done. It's this usuzumi. A thick brush appears to have been used. The artist is just bulking out the general composition. This is the foundation for the design. And we can see these brush strokes under the more fully worked out anti-penultimate drawing. As I say, these are usually built on the preliminary drawing. In these, the lines are thicker than the lines that will appear in print. They are drawn using a dense ink, and there's much evidence in the anti-penultimate drawing of working and reworking contours, adjusting the placements of parts of the composition. Modifications, revisions, and corrections are often added onto pieces of paper that are pasted over drawings. Sometimes the composition is made up in part or entirely from cutout elements, as we've already seen. I gave you a glimpse of cutout elements, people, flowers, etc., brought together. And then we come to the penultimate drawing. This is the drawing before the hanshidai is created. Here the lines are much finer, about as thin as the lines that will appear in print. There are limited modifications, revisions, and corrections. And these may also sometimes be added onto the surface of the drawing on a piece of paper that's been glued onto it. In the penultimate drawing, most but not all of the details are worked out. Then we come to the block-ready drawing. And here the artist fully realizes the design in every detail, employing his finest brushwork to do so. Then we come to the printed image, and the skillful block cutter captures the artist's brushwork on the surface of the printing block. And the printed pages are actually facsimiles of the block-ready drawing. So I'd now like to just look at some of these drawings from the album and try to see what's going on in them. So here we have on the right a backlit photo of the last image in Isai Gashiki. We then have the penultimate drawing from the album, and then we have the printed image. And it's interesting to see how the background, the tray with the tea pot and the hanging scroll without the drawing are on the backing sheet. And then onto that, they've pasted a landscape that was drawn on a separate piece of paper, and the two figures admiring it. They both have also been drawn on separate pieces of paper and carefully placed below the landscape that they're admiring. Now, the arrow on the top shows you the direction we're progressing to get to the finished product. And on each of these examples, I put in this blue triangle with hanshidai to remind you that the hanshidai that was based on the penultimate drawing once existed, but it was destroyed in the cutting of the block that prints the page. And then here we have one of the flower designs. So a photo of the penultimate drawing and then the printed page itself. And here is an amazing example of compiling the page. Every element in it was drawn separately and then carefully arranged for maximum effect. Backlit photo on the right of the drawing. And we're very fortunate that the backing paper in the album is thin enough that it's been able to photograph every spread in the album with backlighting to reveal its structure to us. And if we overlay it, you can see how close the block-ready drawing was to this penultimate drawing. And here we have the last of the pages of Netsuke in the book. And we can see all the details that have been added onto the hanshidai that then appear on the block in the printed book. And I think this one is a very telling example. The artist expended great effort. I mean, he put effort into this penultimate drawing to make this, to show that this was all fur. But when he prepared the hanshite, he went to the extra trouble of indicating the stripes on the tiger, which were then replicated by the block cutter. This is a very significant addition to the penultimate drawing. And we find many examples of this, of these higher levels of refinement that are missing from the penultimate drawing that would have been added by the artist when he created the hanshite. And here we have the two examples that I showed you before. We have a penultimate, the anti-penultimate drawing with a lot of the preliminary drawing visible underneath it. And then we have penultimate drawing. Just so you can see how it's worked and reworked in the anti-penultimate drawing. And then it's that much more refined. And then it's almost like getting the image in focus. And then the hanshite would have been even more sharply focused. Now, I call this fine-tuning a design. And I had a great time with this image. This is one of the most bloodiest images in Isai Gashiki. And here is the preliminary drawing. Now look carefully at the flying head. There is actually a pentimento, a sheet of paper that's been pasted over it to change the look of that head. And now let's look at the main figure here. And the same has been done with him. And if we see backlighting, we actually find that there are a number of pentimenti added to the sheet of paper. So what's been going on? If we look at the flying head, the first thing you notice is that the angle has been turned ever so slightly to give more impetus to the head flying through the air. And also you can see that in the original penultimate drawing, the sweatband was still tight on the man's forehead. Whereas the flying head now, the sweatband is coming loose from the force of the blow that struck off his head and sending it flying through the air. So more energy has been put into it, both by the tilt of the head and the loosening of the sweatband. But then when we compare this revised version on the penultimate drawing with the printed version, we see that the artist also added blood at the line where the neck was cut. And here we see the main figure, the protagonist. And I was wondering what was going on here because the faces are very similar. And I think the problem was probably with these lines here, that this looks more like a lock of hair that might have confused the block cutter. So it was clarified what exactly was going on. These were the wrinkles in his forehead between his eyebrows. These are not hairs coming out from under his headband. And here you can see how incredibly thin the paper is that was used for the drawing, for the copying through of these underdrawings at each stage. Now, if we overlay, as I do here, the printed image onto the penultimate drawing, it looks like, well, they're practically identical. But let's have a closer look. I've noted 5 areas where we find significant differences that would have been in the hanshite that appear in the printed image. So in A, you can see that the hillside has not only had plants added up here and here, but this whole line here has been put in. Perhaps the artist felt there was too much empty space here that needed to be filled. If we look at B, we have a stream running along here. It looks a bit to me like a roll of cloth that's just been set out there as lines on it. Whereas in the hanshite and then the printed version, a real effort has been made to suggest the movement of the water in the stream. C presents us with something quite curious. In the preliminary drawing, we can see that there was going to be a slope here. But when the penultimate drawing was prepared, that was abandoned in favor of this kind of contour here. But when we look at the printed image, it's clear that in the hanshite, in the block ready drawing, the artist reinstated the original conception. There. And then if we go to D, you have to admit the face in this penultimate drawing is hard to read. It's dark, it's obscured, and it's much, much clearer in the final drawing here. And then if we move on to here and the armor, here the armor is much more finely worked, denser in its overall feel. And perhaps it was felt that that would have created too dark an area across the middle of the composition. So it was lightened there. I don't think it was to make life easier for the block cutter, but rather to lighten the overall effect, because if you see, we have lots of detail added elsewhere in the armor, and we have all of these patterns introduced here, which is what we would expect. The artist wouldn't necessarily waste his time on in the penultimate drawing of putting in every fine detail. As I've said, he finishes it in the block ready drawing. But what I would say is that this, and this do not represent a kind of mechanical copying that could be assigned to somebody else. There's creative input in those four. Here, this is something that might have been assigned to a copyist, to an assistant, to a pupil. But most of the work that I've seen, and as I've studied these penultimate drawings and the printed images, the differences all indicate creative input. They are significant. Now I'd like to look at Isai's unpublished Jinbutsu designs. This is a wonderful group of unrealized drawings, made even more wonderful by the fact that we have two versions of two of them. We have an anti-penultimate drawing over preliminary drawing, and then we have the penultimate drawings. And actually the one on the left may be a hanshite, maybe. So here we have the first really worked up version of this, and you'll notice you've got all of these overlays, along with significant details drawn onto the backing sheet here, and the title, Natsunobu, Summer Scenes. And we also have a pentimento on top of this small scrap of paper, improving the face of Shoki. And then we go from that to the penultimate drawing. But we can see that there's still some uncertainty about the overall contours of this female figure. The rest of it is all quite finished. And here, when we see the backlit version photo, we find there are two pentimenti. And I'll go back to those in a moment, why they're there. So here we are, we can compare now the anti-penultimate drawing on the right with the penultimate drawing on the left. If we start in A, I've already commented on the woman in the penultimate drawing. Her contours of the figure are still unresolved. There's a lot of confusion here in the draperies and the rest. But what we find is that the artist couldn't decide what to do with the pipe she's holding in her hand. And finally here, he's put it in her mouth. If we look in B, the little boy holding his cricket cage, his hand is rather far away here, and the artist decided to bring it closer in the penultimate drawing. Similarly, in C, this little boy is eating fruit. Well, the other pieces of fruit are on a tray some distance from him. So that's been brought right in front of him. Can you see these are all fine-tuning? We might not have noticed this gap here, but the artist felt it was significant. Similarly here, this is a bit awkward. This makes more sense. Then we look at the child in the tub with his mother. In this drawing, his one hand is raised, the other is down. But in the penultimate drawing, both arms are raised up, maybe to emphasize his excitement. And then finally here, this is one of the pentimenti. The woman's head has been moved down just a few millimeters. But I think the issue here was that it was abutting too closely to the line of this mat. And the man's head has been moved ever so slightly as well. There's another pentimento there, but not as much as here. So there was this real concern as to how the images were organized, were placed. And we can see at each stage, these modifications are being made. And it's a pity that this was never published so we could see what the artist's final thoughts were going to be about that design, that cheek. Now, this is another example of anti-penultimate and penultimate drawings. But I wonder if the one on the left might not be actually a hanshitae, when we see that special care was made here to render what here are very plain, stiff, dull lines in a more calligraphic style. None of the other drawings in the book that were not published, or none of the other drawings in the book have use of this kind of flowing line. And then this is another of these Jimbutsu sheets. We only have this state of it, but you see this is composed again of an assemblage of drawings. And similarly, the last one, which is incomplete, the top left area was still to be filled. This really is work in progress. It was just stopped. And I can't help wondering, was this how Hokusai's Kyogo Monjin assisted in the preparation of Hokusai manga and other books in the 1810s? Because, you know, in the colophons of the earliest printings of Hokusai manga 1 through 11, these Kyogo Monjin are named, various of his pupils. This is very prominent. I mean, they clearly took an important, played an important role in the assemblage of those books. And they also appear in other of Hokusai's books from the 1810s and early 1820s. However, when the Nagoya publisher Erakuya Toshiro took over complete control of the printing blocks for Hokusai's books, he removed all mention of the Kyogo Monjin. By that point, they wanted to suggest that these were purely the work of Hokusai, that nobody else assisted in any other way. Sorry, that's a small digression, but these drawings in this album show us the ways in which pupils might have been put to work in assembling drawings by the master. And indeed, that's what's said in the prefaces, preface of the first manga, that drawings would be assembled and printed. The 300 drawings that Hokusai had produced when he had visited Nagoya. So just to review the way I see it, we have a three-stage process: preliminary drawing, the anti-penultimate drawing, which is in itself still preliminary, but it's taking form. We then have the penultimate drawing, where a great deal of refinement is brought into it, much finer lines are being used. And then that provides the basis for the artist to create the hanshitae, in which he fully realizes, as I say, every detail of his design. And the end product, the printed image, is the facsimile of that hanshitae. Now, I have to address, toward the end of my talk now, what I call the myth of the copyist. Now, some Western scholars claim, without concrete evidence, that copyists were responsible for the creation of block-ready drawings, the hanshitae. This view is well expressed by Montefiore in his review of for the Burlington magazine of the British Museum exhibition Beyond the Great Wave, which took place in 2017. In the review, Forer challenged the attribution to Hokusai of hanshitae for the late series 100 Poems Retold by the Nurse. Forer does not believe that the drawings were by Hokusai because, according to him, it would be contrary to common practice if they had been drawn by Hokusai himself. And there is no reason why he would be an exception in this respect. Such detailed drawings are normally the work of professional and highly skilled copyists. I'm afraid I disagree with this claim, although there are a number of people who have repeated it. This assumption that it was common practice for the block-ready drawings for books produced in the Edo period reflects, I believe, the biases and assumptions of Europeans who are steeped in a very different tradition of printmaking. In Western printmaking, copyists or draftsmen played a very significant role. They were the intermediaries between the artist and the completed print. They translated images from one medium to another. They stripped out color, and they also usually reduced the size of the image. Now, there were European artists who worked directly and creatively in the print medium. Rembrandt is an outstanding example. However, such original prints that are not reproducing a work created in a different medium, were a very small part of the enormous output of prints in Europe between 1600 and 1900. In Japanese printmaking, the block cutter did not interpret or translate or adapt an image created in another medium. The Japanese block cutter worked from block-ready drawings. These drawings were created by the artist expressly for reproduction through printing. The block cutter followed the lines of the block-ready drawing as closely as humanly possible when cutting the printing blocks. His goal, to cut a block that would print an image that was a facsimile of the block-ready drawing, a facsimile of the hanshidai. However, the role of copyists in the production of hanshidai for text pages was very important. He was a hiko. He was a skilled calligrapher who copied out the text in a clear, uniform style for cutting into printing blocks. He did not copy images. Now, I've not encountered evidence to support the assertion that copyists created block-ready drawings for Hokusai's books. The little evidence that survives suggests quite the opposite. When Hokusai complained to the publisher Suzanbo that the eyes and noses in figures he created for Toshisa and Ehon were not correct, Hokusai did not blame a copyist. He blamed the block cutter. There was no copyist for him to blame. Hokusai would not have entrusted to copyists the realization of his intentions in books such as Denshin Gakkyo, Imayo Sekkin Hinagata, Chūgi Suikoden Ehon Onaimagawa, Fugaku Hyake, Toshisen Ehon, Ehon Musashi Abumi, and so on. I will share just one example, which you see here from Imayo Sekkin Hinagata, Hokusai's designs for combs and for pipes. And here we can see the fine detail that was the norm in Hokusai's book designs in the last decades of his life. The thought that a copyist would manage that correctly, I do not find credible. I have a quiz for you. I have a question for you. How many birds can you count in this image? Just to help you, there are 5 birds riding on the waves, hidden within the intricacies of the waves themselves, but each clearly delineated by Hokusai. And we actually do have block-ready drawings from Hokusai's brush for book illustrations, and those are the 103 drawings recently acquired by the British Museum. Here we can see Hokusai's brushwork. And as chance would have it, so just to summarize here, the production of the hanshidai is a creative act. It's not a mechanical process. It's only in the hanshidai that the artist fully realizes his intention. The hanshidai is the critical link between the artist's conception and the printed image. And the printed image is a facsimile of the hanshidai. Let's go back then to the block-ready drawing, one of the 103 from the Banmotsu Ehon Daizenzu, and compare it with Hokusai's last book, Ehon Saishikitsu. I think this is probably as close as we can come to seeing what a block-ready drawing of a printed page looked like, because the ducks in the two are so akin to one another that we can see that you can see what the hanshidai would have looked like, the hanshidai that was destroyed when the block was cut. And most certainly then this text would have been added around Hokusai's drawings on the hanshidai by the hiko. But you know, Hokusai was paid big money for his hanshidai. According to one of his letters, he received 1 bu of gold per cho, per sheet. That's a very high price. Hokusai's publishers paid him high fees for his drawings. When they did that, they were paying for block-ready drawings that were ready for the printer. The power of the line, the coherence of the overall compositions, all relied on the artist's vision as realized by the artist in the block-ready drawing. And it's almost painful for me to leave those Hokusai drawings and go back to the Isai drawings, because we've been looking at the work of a great artist, and Isai, I'm afraid, is just a competent artist. Thank you very much. Suzuki-sensei.
Thank you very much for the wonderful talk, as always. Oh God, it's amazing. Let's move on to the discussion time. If any of the participants have questions or comments, please speak up or raise your hand. Clark sensei. Tim Clark, please.
英語でよろしいですか？まず、とりあえず。
はい、どうぞよろしくお願いします。
Forgive me if I just make a few comments first in English. I'd first like to thank Dr. Tinios on behalf of the British Museum for his donation of this fascinating album to the British Museum. And we are particularly touched that he has donated the album in memory of Miyamoto Junko-san. Ellis, your talk today has been a very careful examination and analysis of this important survival. I was particularly impressed by the backlit photos, which demonstrate, in this case at least, a kind of cut and paste technique used by artists in their working drawings. And this rare survival of the Isai Gashiki album is a brilliant case study of up to 3 stages of preliminary preparatory drawings, as you have demonstrated. And this is an example which it seems can be securely attributed to Katsushika Isai, to a Hokusai pupil. Now, we're familiar with a series of articles written by the French scholar Bernard Rousseau, which discuss Hokusai's drawings. And I was interested that Monsieur Rousseau comes at the issue of the different stages from the other direction, that he also broadly identifies 3 stages.
Yes.
For the first stage, he uses the Japanese term ichiji shitae, which you could translate as preliminary first stage preparatory drawing. And then Monsieur Rousseau's second stage is just described as shitae, so preliminary drawing. And I think I'm right in saying that he allows for several versions of the shitae, possibly.
Yeah.
And then we get to the third stage, which is the hanshitae. So I'm just interested that you seem to be perhaps moving in different directions, but broadly in agreement about three stages of drawing.
Yeah. Can I just say, yes, when I read this article, I thought, yeah, And he does also mention in it that each one is representing a further elaboration, a further refinement of the design. And I think that the album illustrates that very well.
And of course, Mr. Russo also developed a theory that Katsushika Isai was helping Hokusai a lot in his later career.
Yes.
For the 100 Views of Mount Fuji, for the 100 Poets series of prints, and also for the set of 3 untitled volumes in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts.
Well, could I just say, first of all, that if Katsushika Isai was actually helping Hokusai on Fukaku Hyake, the 100 Views of Fuji, he was an incredible prodigy, because he would have been about 13 years old when the first volume was published.
I don't think either you or I agree with his theory, but I just
wanted to
the theory, because this is a major way in which Isai has been presented in Western literature in recent decades. So it's important to acknowledge that.
We know nothing.
What your album shows is that although there are some very impressive drawings, particularly of warriors by Isai, the style of all of these drawings is quite different from Hokusai, at least to my eyes.
Yes.
I mean, there is a gap here of 15 years since Hokusai has died, but if we accept this as drawings for a major work by Isai, then I think they're recognizably different from drawings by Hokusai in terms of what I call micro mannerisms of style, the way the rocks are drawn, the way the trees are drawn, the water, plants, even the dotting on the design. They're clearly Katsushika school, they're influenced by Hokusai, but they're not the same, demonstrably not the same as by Hokusai. So I wonder what your feeling is on that. I have other things to say about copyists, but I'll stop there.
No, yes, fine. I think, there are issues, there are problems with what Mr. Russo was arguing about the role of Isai. We know virtually nothing about Isai. He's being burdened now with a responsibility by Isai, a role by Bernard in Hokusai's production, for which there is no clear basis. Right? And I would rather say that without clear evidence, I don't think we can assign that particular kind of role to him. And unfortunately, Mr. Russo never saw this album, and he might have had to reconsider some of the things that he was saying in it. And there is also a problem of some of the drawings that he does attribute to Hokusai, as to whether they are actually Hokusai drawings themselves. But I think that takes
a really huge field, as we all know. It's very complicated. But the brilliant thing about your presentation is it's a very concrete example which can be securely attributed to Katsushika Isai. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Actually, you say you have some questions about copyists. I'd love to hear what you feel about.
Well, maybe somebody else should be invited to ask a question first.
Okay, fine.
If there's time later.
Yeah.
Okay, so before Tim Clark Sensei's question about copyist, I got the message from a person who is listening to your talk via YouTube. Victor Snack. You know him.
Yes.
Okay. He said, "Thank you, Ellis, for an outstanding and highly informative lecture. It's fascinating to see how designs changed and developed between the preliminary and the penultimate, I still can't say it, penultimate and hanshitae." That's what he said.
Okay, yes.
Any other questions? Oh, Eugenia.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Tinios, for the really fascinating talk and for teaching us more about this interesting work and album and its really detailed illustrations. That was really fascinating. It was a pleasure to look at it and to listen to you at the same time. I'm afraid it's quite far from my personal field of specialization, so probably my question will be quite simple. But I was absolutely fascinated by your description of the development of the image with the anti-penultimate and the penultimate version. And I know it probably will be highly speculative, but do you have an idea how the process looked like? Was it a discussion that the artist had together with his students in order how to improve it? Who was discussing, who was making those decisions to move this line here and move that line there? Or was it up to the artist? Was it up to his workshop? Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks.
It's a very good question, and I wish we had concrete answers to it. We don't know that Isai had any group of students working with him. I think we should assume that these adjustments were made by Isai himself as he looked at it. It's an eye that's very much attuned, I think, to that placing, and that those few millimeters seem to matter to him, to the extent that he would paste, he would redraw ahead and paste it there to give us that little bit more space. I think this was something that an artist is always revising his ideas and refining them. And I think I'd rather see it like that and less a matter of discussion. And certainly maybe Hokusai with his pupils would come along with his red brush and say, no, I don't like that there, and I want to move that there, and so on. You do find in some drafts where you've actually got comments written. I'm thinking particularly for Wa-kan, where you have these complex illustrations and text combined. And there was one where the artist's preliminary sketch had a certain kind of gait, and there's a big red X on it and notes saying, I want this kind of gait here. So that was a collaborative effort because it was an author and an artist trying to realize a vision. Whereas I think something like this, it's the artist himself who's coming back and doing the fine tuning. Try to think about Rubens coming to readjust something one of his pupils did.
Yeah, it reminds me of the process working on a text in a sense, when you're writing an article and you just go back to that version and you just rewrite and, I don't like this sentence, I like to move it there. Do we have a sense of how much time would pass between those versions, or, after, would he let it rest for a little bit and come back to it and revise it? I know it's very difficult, but yeah.
How the individual artists work, but what is very impressive, if it's accurate in the letter, is that the fee that Hokusai could expect for one of these sheets was very high. So he was putting work onto it, and somebody said to me, "Oh, Hokusai couldn't possibly have taken the time." It's about the 103 drawings at the British Museum, could have taken the time. But what was he doing? I mean, they were paying for his line, not a copyist line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Professor Simon Kainer.
Hello, Simon. Hi.
Good morning, everybody. I guess it's a Ohayou gozaimasu for everybody here in the UK, and it's a konnichiwa for everybody over in Kyoto. Ellis, it's always such a pleasure to hear you speak, and on behalf of everybody, we couldn't have anybody better, I think, for presenting this fabulous material. Obviously, I have a bit of a question. I've got a couple of comments as well, but maybe just a couple of comments, and then I'll finish off the question, because I've got to sign off, unfortunately, at about 10:30 for another meeting I've got to get to. But I just wanted to say what a wonderful way to start this new collaboration between the University of East Anglia and the Sainsbury Institute and the Art Research Centre at Ritsumeikan University. I've just had a quick look through the list of people who have been listening in this morning, and I think we have all of our MA students, our MA in Interdisciplinary Japanese Studies, listening to you. And I have to say that when we first started talking about doing a new MA at the University of East Anglia on Japanese Studies, this is precisely the kind of collaboration I think that we had in mind. And of course, the pandemic has allowed us to really make the very best of the technology that's available for us now, hooking up world-leading specialists such as yourself. It's great to see Tim Clark and colleagues from the British Museum in the list as well. And of course, wonderful colleagues, Suzuki Sensei, Akama Sensei over in Ritsumeikan. And I just want to pay tribute to everybody who's been able to pull together this amazing event. And I know that we've got a series of these activities coming up over the next few weeks as well. And thank you all for making this dream a reality. I think it's absolutely fabulous. And our students, on behalf of our students, I don't believe they could have a better way of learning about this remarkable material than using these sorts of techniques. So thank you to you all, and congratulations on getting this all put together. And particular thanks actually to Ryoko Matsubo, who I know has been working incredibly hard behind the scenes and was over in Japan earlier in the autumn, putting this all together for us as well. But my question, Ellis, is about material culture, actually. As I say, being an archaeologist, and I'm always really struck by the incredible detail that goes into all these drawings, and I'm just thinking, to what extent do you think that somebody like Hokusai was interested in developments in, you know, the sort of the latest gadgets and gizmos that were available to him? He clearly had an extraordinary sort of set of props available to him in his studios, and it must have taken up an enormous amount of room. And I just wonder, has anybody looked at the sort of the material culture aspects of what he was doing at all?
Well, I would recommend Manga Volume 2 to you to see, because there in the first volume he's got the world of people and it's animals, landscapes. But then it's stated in the preface that he's going to look at material culture in Volume 2 as well. And you even have, is it fire irons, you know, for lighting a fire? From the he reproduces all sorts of objects from daily life in that book, pages of them. Yeah. And then he goes on and he's got those astonishing books on pages on carpentry. There's a later manga volume that's half devoted to carpentry, and there's a whole book devoted to architecture and buildings. And when you look at these drawings, you figure you could actually construct that building timber by timber. It's all there. So he was deeply engaged with material culture. But he also, I think, if you look at his Chinese illustrations, he created a virtual China. He used all of these sources, some of which appeared quite dry, you know, the images that came through, and he somehow processed them and creates this incredibly gripping and exciting vision of China. And there he's full of small details as well, whether it's the ceramics, the weapon, armor, to create this alien world for his viewers. So yes, the materiality was central to him. What am I depicting? Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Ellis. Thank you.
Well, we got some comments from YouTube. One is from Bangkok in Leiden. He said, "Dear Ellis, Bangkok here. This is Stellar." And another, maybe Ellis, you can see from chat area, but one question from Aidan. Do you think that Isai's pieces that were relabeled as Hokusai's work had any impact on Hokusai's standing as an artist?
No, I don't. That's a good question. You know, because we have Hokei's books that were reassigned to him. We have Hokuun's books that were reassigned to Hokusai, as well as these by Isai. I think that such was the idolatry of Hokusai in the late 19th and early 20th century, particularly among Europeans, that if they could buy a book like Dochugafu as Hokusai, with quite flaccid landscapes in it that had poems cut out of them, so that there's all this space in them that doesn't make any sense. You know, they did, their eye wasn't attuned. They were, what's that saying? They were appreciating with their ear rather than their eye. They were told it was Hokusai, so it had to be great. And there was enough of a similarity in the style that they would say, oh yes, this is a Hokusai book. Yeah, that's something I have thought about. I appreciate the question about did it in any way diminish his stature. But I think that it was such an uncritical appreciation of him that these books passed muster, that they didn't diminish his reputation.
All right. Thank you so much, Aidan, for the question. Oh, and Dan Kok also gave you a question. Dan said, my question would be, do you think there would ever be an infill of thin gray ink, a block of color, for instance, in a block ready drawing? My question.
Yeah, that we know that Hokusai's books of the 1830s were published with the dilute ink. There was a block printing usuzumi.
Oh, okay.
There were definitely blocks cut for that, and all of the Boston drawings, the BM drawings, and many others have got areas that have a gray wash in them. And I can understand how that gray wash would have been realized in the printing block from that drawing. If we're talking about a sky, a background, I'm not clear exactly how the block for the gray was realized, was cut. This remains an open question. What did the gray areas mean in the drawings? But Hokusai clearly conceived these drawings with gray in them. And I've seen an example, for example, one of his warrior books, Ehon Musashi Abumi, which if you see it just keyblock only, it's fine. The designs are great. But when you have that added block, they have a depth, an increased depth and drama to them. But that was expensive. And I think one of the problems with Hokusai was he was a very expensive artist to realize in print. He was extremely demanding. He insisted on Egawa Tomikichi, if possible, to cut the blocks for him. And he had a high fee. Hokusai had a high fee for his drawings. His drawings were incredibly complex. Fugaku Hyake was not a cheap book. If you think about 100 Views of Fuji, if you think about all the subtle use of usuzumi in it and the bokashi in it, a lot of work went into printing those books. And it's no surprise, for example, that the Ehon Musashi Abumi, the warrior book, you can barely find copies of it that have the grays in them. Most of the copies that survive are line only. For some reason, I've never seen an edition, a printing of the 100 Views of Fuji without the gray blocks. I think they were just too integral to what the book is about. So, you know, they were very important, but how we get from these marvelously finished drawings to the blocks that would print both the line and the gray, I don't know. Okay.
Well, I hope Dan was satisfied with the answer. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's intriguing. Any other questions? Shall we see? Oh, Tim, please continue your copyist question.
Or others, Tim, please.
Apologies to everybody else for monopolizing Ellis's time, but you did raise the very interesting and a major issue about the possible role of copyists, whether they existed or not in Japan with respect to pictures. And there is just one really concrete source that we know of, thanks to Roger Keyes. I'm just showing up to the camera the theatrical world of Osaka prints, which we all use as our Bible for Osaka print studies. And Roger listed a source in Osaka, which he dated to about 1831. It's a kind of who's who listing artists working in Osaka at that time. The Japanese title is Naniwa Shoryu Gajin Meika Annai. So it's a who's who. And he presents, this source presents two lists of artists. There are about 10 or 12 names in each list. And one list is described as yakusha nigawe o omo tosu. So these artists mainly did likeness portraits of actors. And the second list is hanshita o omo tosu. These artists mainly did hanshita. Now, the million-dollar question is, what does hanshita mean in this context?
Yes.
In 1978, or whenever it was, Roger translated this as block copyist. But I think it's really open to debate.
Yeah.
You could read that list as these are the artists who don't do actor likeness portraits. So dividing the art world into people specializing in actor portraits and the rest. There is no sense that these artists who specialize in hanshita are doing hanshita of other artists' designs. That doesn't seem to be the implication.
No.
So I just present that as a piece of concrete evidence for this discussion, but with a plea to think more carefully about, how to translate these terms. Maybe calling it a block copyist is with knowledge from the Western print tradition firmly embedded in your head, whereas we need to kind of unlearn that mindset, perhaps.
I think so. I'd like to, if I may, put a slide up. Tim, this is from a Gokan from 1818, illustrated by Toyokuni. And I think it needs careful study and interpretation, but can we all see this? Is this visible? Yep. Okay, so we start with the draft from the author. And these Gokan drafts survive, and the author does basically stick figures, and he has his text. And it's showing us a fascinating sequence. That draft goes then to the artist, who on a clean sheet of paper is realizing the figures that the author would like to see on a spread. Then both the draft and the draft here and the artist's realization of the figures go to the copyist, who is not copying the lot. He's copying the text from the author's draft onto the sheet on which the artist had put the figures. There's no intermediary copyist indicated in this. And then that hanshitae goes to the block cutter for the creation of the block, which then ends up with the printer. And I think this is the sequence that we're talking about, but in the Hokusai book, we start here because there is no author that he's illustrating. And I think there's this interesting thing in Hokusai's career. In the middle of his career, he stopped illustrating books for other people, so he wouldn't be constrained by the requirements of the author in terms of what should be in an illustration. And then he had this free range to do what he wanted. And I think it went pretty much like this. And if you had any text to go on, it would go there. Otherwise, Hokusai's hanshitae would go straight to the block cutter and then to the printer. Now, this is a scrap, if you will, but it is an attempt to present the way in which Gokan were produced. And I think we can extrapolate from it to other kinds of books. And again, when we look at something like this, to put this in the hands of a copyist is a dodgy proposition. That's all for now. Tim, anything? I also found it, I know I shouldn't make comparisons, but if we compare Isai's demons and monsters with Hokusai's, they are worlds apart. Absolutely, no contest. anyone else out there?
Any questions?
Any further questions, please?
Any questions or comments?
Matsuda-san, yeah?
It's okay? Pick up.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I just following the team's question about the actor prints copies. And I wonder because, for example, actor prints is have to be published soon after the performance. And all production process is slightly different from book production. So it's like artist needs to quickly done before people is forgetting. So for example, like Kunisada or Tokuno-san, who has a large studio, it's possible to all pupils have to create a finish line. It's probably not the actor face, actor's likeness, which is quite important part of the production, but rest of the design, for example, do you think it's possible if pupils or some other people, not all main artists, could help the created Hanshitae for that kind of publication?
Is that for Tim or me?
For you first.
I think you know, we have talked about the production of actor prints, and the nigao in Kunisada's prints is so important. And after his death, his students were still producing actor prints, and they were producing half-length portraits, which are quite striking. But you can tell, without even looking at the signature, that the nigao don't have that strength, that power that Kunisada could put into those the faces. So I think that in most cases he would be the one responsible for the nose, the eyes, the mouth, the overall shape of the head. But the rest of it, there's no reason why it could not be studio work. And I think in the 1850s, when his output was phenomenal, that some of those, some of the actor triptychs are really pretty dead. And I think they were largely studio work. And I think in those even they were just mimicking his nigao in them, but they had his name on them because his name sold prints, his name sold gokan. It was very important, but there was a huge input from pupils there. And as you say, it's a very different kind of business, producing actor prints. They have to be current, immediate, and appeal. Of course, they have to be recognizable as what they are, as actor portraits. And that's the most important thing I think that Kunisada would have been concerned with. And he'd leave the overall elaboration of backgrounds and costume patterns and the rest to these students in his studio. But I do have the feeling that for certain special series, Kunisada did everything. Perhaps The Magicians, for example.
Yeah. But we believe the Hokusai is an artist he wants to take a lead for everything.
Everything, yeah. I just find, as I was looking at the 103 drawings again in preparation for this, material like this, it's just staggering. Yeah.
There are a few comments and in the chat. Tristan, if you are here, you can speak it up. Tristan said, "Thank you for the wonderful talk. I was wondering what you thought Isai's contribution to the history of Japanese art is, and what he may learn from studying in detail."
I think that Isai's contribution to Japanese art is minor. It's very minor. He's a very minor artist. We know nothing really about his life. 15 books over 20 years. Yeah, not that enormous a production. And he's really working entirely in the shadow of Hokusai. And as I say, he was accomplished, but he was not a great artist. And I think we can just leave it there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. The next one, Asha said, I'm very interested in the method of piecing together larger pages with individually placed images. It's
Yes.
quite different from the modern manga volumes, which work in the opposite manner. This order method seems a lot smarter.
You prefer the older method, yeah. Yeah. But this whole idea of pages with lots of small images, it goes back into the 18th century. And its origins probably are the imported Chinese painting manuals, where they have these jimbutsu sections, human figure sections, where you get lots of little figures on the page that you would copy and put into your landscape. But then you get with Masayoshi's Ryakugashiki, I think the first extended development of this idea of assembling lots of small pieces onto a large page. So there were precedents to what we find in Hokusai's books, in Masayoshi and Kawamura Bumbo. Bumbo's Soga and Bumbo Kanga both are collections of many little figures that would have been organized in exactly the same way. And then you have these marvelous paper that they were using to do this, where they could actually overlay a sheet of paper onto the penultimate drawing, and then using a brush, a trace, draw a trace. If it's the artist, he's actually drawing it afresh with the guide of the penultimate drawing under it. And that ink doesn't go through, it doesn't run, it's captured by the paper, create that. And so you can have these piecemeal compositions. And when you look at the Isai album itself, with all of those pasted on pieces of paper, really the surface is incredibly smooth. You cannot always tell where the pentimenti have been glued onto the sheet of paper. This is the kind of paper that we're talking about that would lie so smoothly on the surface. It was such an education for me to have the experience of studying that album of drawings firsthand.
Thank you. Oh, so we really have to learn about the characteristics of Japanese paper washi again.
Absolutely, all the different categories of paper and the thicknesses. The other thing that I didn't say is that in the first printing of the Isai Gashiki, each folded cho piece of paper was interleaved. A sheet of blank paper was bound in there in the fold, so that you got no see-through, so you could really appreciate these complex designs in the book.
Okay, there are so many questions in the chat box right now. And I'm afraid I can finish everything by 7:30 here. But anyway, I will read. I'm sorry if this question has already been answered. My internet went down during the first half of this Q&A. But to you, both professionally and personally, what is the most interesting element of Isai's works? From Ali? Yeah.
What's the most interesting element of his work? I think it's seeing somebody working in the shadow of Hokusai, trying to be individual at the same time, but there's this amazing shadow. And he had a limited talent, and I think he did achieve something. I mean, his books are pleasant to view. I don't know. He's okay, you say. But I think that's fine.
Okay, let's move on to another one. Thank you, Dr. Tinios, for your talk. Asano Shugo writes that block-ready drawings are normally destroyed during the process of cutting the printing blocks. Why then have so many survived in this case?
Okay, well, first of all, I'll say that we don't have block-ready drawings in the Isai volume. We have the preparatory drawings. However, we have block-ready drawings at the Museum of Fine Art and the British Museum. And I think part of that is because Hokusai's books were so expensive to produce that even though the publishers commissioned these block-ready drawings, they couldn't face the added expense of having them cut and printed. So it is exceptional to have so many survive, but they look like a lot, but they're all from, as Tim Clark has suggested, one great publishing project, the 178 in Boston and the 103 in the British Museum, were part of one broadly conceived work, an encyclopedia. So it's exceptional that we would have this many block-ready drawings survive. It's very, very rare. But I think part of it is also there could have been publishers having problems. And we've also found cases where block-ready drawings were put aside for 40, 50 years, and then the blocks were cut. This is the Ehon Wa-kan that I wrote about a couple of years ago, that it was not published until 1880. Whereas the drawings were probably prepared in the 1830s by Hokusai. And Nishimura just held on to those drawings until the moment arrived when they would commission a block cutter. And we know that the blocks were cut in 1879 because that block cutter was active. It's the exception that we have these wonderful block-ready drawings.
Two other comments from Tim Clark. Many thanks to Ellis and Elsie for this wonderful talk. Apologies that I now have to leave for another meeting. Best wishes to all, Tim Clark. Simon Keina Sensei also said, thanks again, Ellis. And to me, thank you, Matsuba Sensei, for facilitating. So this should be it. And the time is just up for the open part of this seminar. I'd like to thank you again, Professor Tinios,